It's February 2015, and we're at the studios of 22 Cans in Guildford, a place where through the windows you can still see one of Lionhead's many buildings at Wannockham Court. It has, to say the least, been a bad week. A tense Peter Molyneux sits down at his desk for a scheduled phone interview with John Walker, editor of the PC games website Rock Paper Shotgun, that he's not looking forward to. He takes a deep breath before picking up the phone. He asks Walker whether he should just talk, or if the journo has questions. Walker has many questions. A moment passes, the recorder is turned on, and Walker asks the first of them. Peter Douglas Molyneux, OBE. Do you think that you're a pathological liar? Freeze frame. Rewind. We need to go back a little, a couple of years at least. We need to look through the events that led up to a journalist being able to ask someone like Peter Molyneux flat out whether he thinks he's a liar or not. If this question had been asked of Molyneux 5 years ago, the interview would have ended then and there without another word. The journalist in question would have been all but blacklisted by Microsoft. There would be no feature article. But the times, they have changed. Back we go then to 2012, shortly after Molyneux leaves Lionhead to start his new venture, the one where he can finally, truly be independent. 22 Cans. In May he did something pretty cool actually. He gave the keynote speech at the Molly Jam in London, a 48-hour game jam where people made games based off of tweets from the world famous Peter Molyneux Twitter account, something that good old Molly actually found hilarious.
What we need is innovation, and we need to come together and do crazy things, whether they be radioactive babies or blind men walking into lampposts. I don't care what it is. That's what the world wants from us.
He also admitted that a part of his presence there was to look for folks that could potentially be hired for his new setup, but it was fine to see Molyneux being a good sport. And of course it was important for him to do something like this as it made for quite a nice introduction. This is Peter Molyneux entering a new world, an independent world. The Molly Jam is a nice moment, a humanizing moment. It's a shame there wouldn't be all that many of these in the times to come.
Ideas are nothing. Us designers are useless individuals without the brilliance of coders and artists and sound people. So, if anyone wants to work at 22 Cans, P. Molyneux at 22 Cans, send me an email.
It wouldn't be long before they released their first game, a mobile clicker. Curiosity, or to give it its full title, Curiosity What's Inside the Cube, was released in November of 2012 to something of a mixed reception. Is this actually what Peter Molyneux left Lionhead for? A game where you just tap a screen endlessly like a bloody woodpecker? And you'd be tapping for a long time. The Curiosity Cube apparently consisted of 69 billion cubelets. Fortunately, you'd be working on removing them with everyone else, so long as the servers were up anyway. The removal of the cube's layers took several months, and old Pete had a classic bit of Molyneux-ese to deflect accusations that he was just making an artsy cookie clicker.
I'm resisting any temptation in giving any clues what's in the middle. Life-changing is what life-changing, you can look up the dictionary definition of life-changing. You can, if you want, you can score me on how life-changing it is. Give me a score. And I guarantee you, out of 100, that score will be, if not 100, then it'll be 99.
101?
Maybe.
Finally though, on the 26th of May, the final layer of the cube was removed, and all was revealed. The winner, a Scottish student named Brian Henderson, was asked whether he wished to keep the contents of the cube to himself, or if he wanted to share the news to everybody. He chose the latter. So what was Brian Henderson's prize? A highly important role in 22 Cans' new God game that would, apparently, change his life. He would be the God of Gods, with a large amount of control over the game's world, and shares in profits from the finished game.
You, the person who would reach the centre, will be the God of all people that are playing Godus. You will intrinsically decide on the rules that the game is played by. And, here's the life-changing bit, You will share in the success of the product. Every time people spend money on Godus, you will get a small piece of that pie.
Curiosity was, in the end, a months-long hype campaign for Molyneux and 22 Can's new game. Although on reflection it's probably the best thing that the studio's made to date. The God game itself had already been announced. It was called Godus, and had in the main been pushed via the new hip service that everybody was using, good old Kickstarter. Molyneux's arrival on Kickstarter was the one that people really greeted with suspicion. Why does he need it? This is the man who was, very recently, a big cheese at frickin' Microsoft, a very successful game designer with a lot of personal capital. And he needs to ask people for money?
One of the brilliant things about Kickstarter is we can use you. It's your help, your input. And if you look at the pledges, we really are going to listen to you. I don't want to promise anything. I just want to deliver the glory of the old days in the new format of today's world. And with your help, we can do that.
He was far from the only one, but these questions didn't come up as much when big industry bods like Tim Schafer, Chris Roberts and Brian Fargo did their Kickstarters. They did for Molyneux and, to a similar extent, David Braben, hitting Kickstarter with Elite Dangerous, having presumably spent most of the last decade failing to make The Outsider. Molyneux, wearing his head of a small studio hat, defended himself against the arguments vigorously, asking why he should be precluded from taking part.
And of course there are some things where people think, Peter is, he's too well established to use Kickstarter. And if I was still part of Microsoft, I'd agree. But being a small independent and investing a lot of your own money in a studio, it's a very scary thing.
This might have been a fair thing to say, but it was risky. Controversies over Molyneux's Kickstarter presence almost derailed the campaign itself, and Godus's funding wasn't a sure thing. In the end though, it made its £450,000 goal with 2 days to spare, earning a total of £526,563. Enough to fund more single player and cooperative modes, as well as Linux support. Molyneux claimed that Godus would be finished and out in 9 months. Quite surprising, as considering how long it had taken to make most of his games, 9 months was barely any time at all. To be fair, 2013 was largely business as usual. Indie or not, Molyneux was as active in the press as he ever was, and a lot of work was at that time being done on Godus. The initial feeling in the months following on from the Kickstarter wasn't all that terrible. The team was certainly active, and Molyneux, as a general gaming legend, still had a bit of goodwill left. This indie venture seemed to be a lot of fun for him.
These group of Italians then got up every day and said, right, we're going to turn these penises into works of art. And they created palm trees out of them, they created puppy dog faces out of them, and that was amazing. I mean, what's going on there? They actually did it day after day after day, setting themselves this impossible task. And then it became the penis creators versus the artists. And when there was this massive, huge thing, what are they going to turn this into? That's amazing.
There's even plenty of footage of Molly doing the odd little thing with YouTube personalities here and there, whether it's talking Godus or having a look back at his old games. It was also not wholly uncommon for Molyneux himself, in the early days of Godus's beta launch, to drop in on regular folks streaming the game on Twitch and have a little chat about it live off the cuff.
So wait, oh my god, it actually is Peter Molyneux. Well, that's made my day. That's made my life. That is amazing. Huge fan, Peter.
These were all very good things indeed, and I would like to stress that, probably because it's the last bit of anything good in this whole video. Alas, something changed on the way. The first worrying sign came in May 2013, when it was announced that the mobile version of Godus would have a publisher, Dina Games. This flew in the face somewhat of Molyneux saying that there would be no publishers involved in the game at any point. People questioned it, but Molly insisted that the game would not be affected, and that the PC version of the game would still come first.
Mode And it says,
Okay.
put the device inside your pocket and lift your leg up to simulate a fart. So let me, hang on, I've not tried this yet.
We've got to try this.
Okay, it's accelerometer here, let's try it.
No. And how embarrassing would that be?
Nope, that brings the score down immediately.
Brilliant idea, poor execution.
Yep.
That's almost like a testimony to my game design theories.
September 2013 saw the initial release of Godus on Steam Early Access, and there wasn't a whole lot there. The Odd News report questioned why the game was released in such an incomplete state, and also wondered just what Godus was actually going to be. That still didn't seem to be altogether set in stone yet. However, people did recognise that the game had potential, so long as it lived up to the promises that Molyneux made of a true evolution of the God game, where your civilization could evolve through the ages. People didn't automatically bury Godus. This little clip from Total Biscuit probably sums up the general thoughts on the game.
I think it's got a lot of potential, and I think it could turn out to be a fantastic game. As it stands right now, it's got too many annoyances for me to recommend getting in on the early access. But we are only 40% done with it, so I'm pretty hopeful for it, honestly.
Molyneux was open enough about it all, saying that the game was far from finished, there was a long way to go, and it was all about experimenting. It feels like a testbed, doesn't it? The classic Molyneux practice, only this time with consumers who are paying a tenner to test the game. Not that this is actually uncommon, and indeed one of the effects of Steam Early Access has been to make the testbed something that can be consumed. The game was for a long time at 56% complete. The 2013 version of the game that we just saw was also replaced with a new version that looked nicer but removed quite a few things, including multiplayer and a lot of the combat. The reaction to this new version was quite negative, and people were worried that the whole thing was gradually looking more and more like a mobile game. If there was any proper work done, it seemed to be on that mobile version, which naturally led many people to suspect that Godus was, first and foremost, a mobile game, in spite of Molyneux claiming that it was nothing of the sort. Mobile or not, reviews and impressions of the game in this state were poor. But for a long time people seemed to forget a little about Godus. Until, at the start of 2015, there were rumblings that not all was well at 22 Cans. In February of that year, things came to a head for various reasons. It was known that less and less people at 22 Cans, a small studio to begin with, were working on Godus. Indeed, it seemed that the company were losing staff more than they were gaining them. There had been virtually no news for months and no updates on Steam. That 56% mark never shifted. One fan of the game, Konrad Nazinski, was vocally unhappy about what was happening in Godus and presented his own ideas as to how the game should be going. He ended up getting in contact with Peter, and in classic Molyneux style, Konrad soon found himself employed as the game's new lead designer. But that was as much as people heard. Also, Molyneux himself was talking about Godus less and less, barely mentioning it in interviews, something that was kind of unusual for Molyneux. Instead, he was talking quite a lot about something called The Trail, an upcoming game for which very few details are still yet known. So why is Molyneux not talking about Godus? Is it because... does he think that Godus is actually finished? Maybe he does. Except of course, in the eyes of seemingly everybody with the exception of Peter Molyneux, it clearly wasn't. And this was the big one. The gaming press decided to find out what happened to Brian Henderson, the reported god of gods who'd opened up the cube and whose life was apparently going to be changed. And they were dismayed by what they found. Henderson's life was decidedly unchanged. He hadn't heard a fin from 22 Cans for months. His God of Gods award and shares in the game's profit, they seemed to be distant and remote. Indeed, very few people had received anything from their Kickstarter pledges. There were supposed to be art books and the like, but nothing was there. And this was the angle from which 22 Cans, and Molyneux in particular, would take an absolute battering in the press. They say that in Guildford you may well have heard the sound of 100 spinning plates smashing on the ground as all of these negative stories suddenly came out. Molyneux and the group mobilised desperately, providing updates on what had been happening in an attempt to prove that they had been working on Godus all this time, which, honestly, not a lot of people believed.
There is a catalogue of things that I did badly and incorrectly because I had never done a Kickstarter campaign before, I had never released on Steam Early Access before, I'd never done a mobile game before, and all of these things meant I made some horrendous mistakes.
The opinion was that Molyneux had done it again. He'd made promises that once again he had not been able to keep. Only this time he'd done it with the help of his fans' money. Molyneux had often been referred to as a pipe dreamer, and perhaps even in some circles as a liar. That's something he's even sheepishly at times admitted to. This, however, was the first time that other epithets such as snake oil salesman, scam artist and con man could actually stick to him. After Brian Henderson, it has to be said that they were more than a little deserved.
I don't want to ever make those mistakes before. We are still passionate about Godus. We've got a team on Godus. We've already spoken about, what they'll be doing on there. I apologise to everyone for the mistakes that I've made, and you have been harsh, and please continue to be harsh.
Where did you learn your trade, you stupid fucking cunt, you idiot?
And so we come to that question. The first question John Walker asked, and the brutal interview that followed. Even more than when we get to Godus as it actually is now, this is probably the crucial moment of this whole part. I'm not about to say it's a good bit of journalism because it's not really, and nor is it meant to be. It's savage and emotional, something that's not just born out of recent Godus news, but through years of bad feeling. These were the questions that someone obviously wanted to ask Molyneux for years, but couldn't. It's angry, basically. Molyneux is on the defensive throughout, trying to persuade John Walker to just come to the studio and you'll see all that's going on. But Walker, with all the fury of a man who considers himself to be gaming journalism's Jeremy Paxman, plus the added fury of thousands of pissed off backers, is steadfast in his questioning. Of the Linux port that's clearly not going to happen, of all the failed promises, of the lack of progress, and of what's going to happen about Brian Henderson. It's harsh and emotional, yes, but a lot of it, in fact pretty much all of it, is deserved. After years of kid gloves, it could almost be said that Peter Molyneux had it coming. The upshot of it all was in the article's headline: Molyneux is not going to give interviews to the press anymore. With this, an interview in Eurogamer, and a final interview in The Guardian, he did his I'm shutting up tour. Everything Peter Molyneux knew was won, and suddenly Peter Molyneux found himself not able to be Peter Molyneux anymore, even if he let quite a few people know that he couldn't be Peter Molyneux anymore, if you catch my drift. He also hired a man named Simon Phillips to be CEO of 22 Cans and handle the business side of things, ostensibly leaving Molly to get on with designing games. Phillips, a 20-year industry veteran, came in basically on a mission of mercy. Morale at this point was understandably quite low, and he made lots of noise in the press about putting things right and putting an utterly broken Peter Molyneux back together again. Now don't get it twisted, I'm not about to defend Molyneux, because a lot of things went wrong here. More than anything else in his career, this was where Molyneux deserved a serious grilling because he absolutely screwed up. His treatment of Brian Henderson was appalling, as was his treatment of every other person who'd backed the game. His promise that the game would be out in 9 months was pure comedy, and his later claim that he actually wasn't massively late because his current record for creating the game stood at 3 years? Yeah, that's obviously bullshit. If things were different and Molyneux was still under a major publisher, Godus would have probably been cancelled a long time ago, and I reckon that if no questions had ever been asked, well, we wouldn't have heard anything. Molyneux struggled to adapt to truly independent life, to what crowdfunding meant to a lot of people. It's not like you can just not deliver at all anymore and face the consequences, because there's so much worse for your reputation. Contingency is not something that people care about as a stretch goal either. The game had changed, but Molyneux didn't quite understand the rules. Do I think that he set out with the intention of fleecing people on the game? No, I think that's a pretty silly thing to say. But do I think that he royally screwed up far more than at any other point in his career? Yes, absolutely. And when things fell apart, there was no protection. In the face of a John Walker type demanding accountability, all the old press tricks weren't going to work. Where are all these PR people? Where are they when you're independent? They don't exist. Maybe they never existed. Looking back on it all, you can see a few reasons why the story just ran and ran. The story of Brian Henderson is an obvious human interest factor. Kickstarters widening on waves of hype from old masters apparently now free to do what they did best were frustrating people as they then struggled or just took forever. Molyneux was both an easy and a very deserving scapegoat for that frustration, and I think people were tired of the kid gloves in general. They were frustrated with Molyneux just automatically thinking everything would be the same as it was in 1989 or 1997, and now pulling his tricks with actual people's money. Molyneux's reputation had taken hits in the past thanks to all those undelivered promises and what have you, but this was when his reputation shattered. All the acorns rolled up into a ball and nothing compared. There's more to come when we get to his legacy. But for now we do have to look a little at Godus as it is currently. It's now called Godus Wars, coming to Steam in that form early this year as a free update for those who already owned Godus, and 11 quid for everyone else. The cynical-minded say that renaming the game like this was probably to hide the hundreds of pages worth of negative reviews that were on Steam's original Godus page. As it is, Godus Wars is still in early access, it's apparently still being worked on, and Brian Henderson doesn't really care anymore. And so, as the final game in a video that's covered so many Peter Molyneux games, what's it actually like? Well, let's look at the original half first. This is Godus in its 2.4 version. There's apparently some sort of story, and some other folks running about called the Astarwai. The game appears to be some sort of simplified hybrid between populous and black and white, only without either the ultimate goal of the former or the complex AI of the latter. And I say appears to be because honestly, there's not much game here at all. You drag the mouse about and do lots of terraforming, make sure that your followers have the required amount of flat land to build their abodes, collect belief as and when, maybe send the odd follower to a pit so you can get gems, and that's about it. Well, I mean, I would say that it appears to be an okay proof of concept, but that is basically all I could say about the game, and that's if I felt like being in any way positive about the game, which I don't, and that'll become clear. Oh, anyway, actually I've missed out stuff. While you're terraforming, you can get chests, which will give you stickers which you can put on your cards and get you closer to activating them. The cards can do things like, I don't know, give you more belief for destroying a rock. Sometimes there's bits of story hidden in them, which is the odd paragraph of nonsense here and there. Occasionally the Astarwai mill about the edge of your territory, meaning you literally have to get them off your lawn by sculpting the land around them. What else? Oh, you can use a leash to drag your followers to where you want them to go. And there's a voyage bit with really exciting terraforming minigames like build a bridge over the sea. This uninspiring mix of gradually more complex puzzles and really annoying AI is truthfully the most game that there is in this package. And, yep, I think that's it. There is literally nothing else to be done in this game, and no purpose aside from just gaining more followers. Oh, and Peter Molyneux drones on about how there'll all be big skyscrapers here one day in the dev commentary. I'm not seeing it, honestly.
We really, in design terms, I really want you to, the reason why we slightly paused the game here, I really want you to get used to leashing, I want you to get used to this way of gameplay. If something is taking a long time, focus on something else. If building is taking a long time, focus on picking up rocks now that they're worth 10 times their belief when you unlock this card.
To be honest, there is more, but getting to it is just beyond tedious. The terraforming or sculpting doesn't work, really. It's not fun to do, not even as fun as clicking around in Populous. There's no depth to it. It's more like a sparsely populated God sandbox where you spend a load of time just unlocking things that you can just screw around with. It all feels like what it is, a poor conversion of a mobile game that clearly took precedence and something that as a game feels utterly incomplete. Like I said, maybe it could be an okay proof of concept, even if it seems as though it's a hodgepodge of classic Molly games, only with all that's good about said games taken out, COD touchscreen controls, and a level of depth that makes Farmville look like a frickin' Paradox game. There could be something there. But alas, this may be what Godus looks like now, but it's also what Godus looked like, almost 2 years ago. And since then we have seen nothing at all on PC. There's apparently a bit more on mobile, if you give a toss. This, the serene side of Godus, is in all likelihood how it is always going to look, and there is pretty much nothing there. This half of Godus is, well, it's basically dead. It's not worth another word. All that you see is dead. Fucking dead. Followers? Dead. A star eye? Dead. Big sacrificial die for me here pit? Dead. It's dead, Jim. Like walking into a nightclub and finding nobody but a depressed coke dealer, Godus is the rotting, dead arse end of a Saturday night. Look, I could basically recreate the parrot sketch here, but I think you got the message okay. It's dead. Let's move on. Godus Wars is the other side, and is Godus's biggest update so far, so big that it necessitated its own Steam page. Apparently 11 people worked on it, including the aforementioned Conrad, who was pissed off at how Godus was going and ended up hired for it. Geez, no wonder he was pissed. Anyway, Brian Henderson is also apparently here as one of the opposing deities. Essentially, this is supposed to take all that's in Godus and fashion it into a God-come real-time strategy game. Also, the game featured a microtransaction on release where you'd have to buy the second continent if you wanted to continue playing the game, because someone obviously thought that Godus hadn't pissed people off enough. After a staggeringly negative reaction, this was pulled after a day. Now of course this is still an early access game, and I guess that should be kept in mind. All the terraforming and whatnot is still here, but now once enough abodes have been built you can fashion them into a citadel, and from that citadel you can make warbands. Warbands smash up the enemy's troops, and the ultimate goal is to capture the enemy's belief vault. Simple enough really. Indeed, very simple. This is bog standard RTS play if that, with a little bit of God stuff thrown in. But again, it is early access, isn't it? I should keep that in mind. There's a little splurge at the start from Molly himself, saying that he always envisioned Godus as two separate games, the peaceful side that we've already seen and this, which I find very hard to believe as this has clearly been knocked together very quickly indeed. Again, it's an average proof of concept at best. It's almost like there could potentially be some sort of RTS here, but it's nowhere near close to ready. Nor is it in any way fun to play, nor does it inspire any sort of enthusiasm. It shouldn't surprise anybody to hear that impressions of Godus Wars were terrible, but I think that would be the case even if it hadn't have been for all the shit surrounding Godus, even though that obviously had a lot to do with it. Rumours had it that even the statement that 11 people were actively working on Godus Wars was an exaggeration, and that in terms of actual game design, there may have only been one. Conrad. It's easy to picture him sitting in a corner, chaining through the day's third bottle of vape juice, trying to get something, anything workable out of Godus. I have a lot of sympathy for the guy, in all honesty. Still, this all feels a bit immaterial. Why? Because there hasn't been any update on Godus Wars since March. 4 months and not a pipsqueak has been heard. The 22 Cans website doesn't help much either. The last update on there is from the summer of 2015. Godus Wars isn't even mentioned on it. To put things in perspective, here's another formerly early access game, Prison Architect by Introversion, a team relatively comparable in size to 22 Cans if not smaller. The alpha for this was made available in September 2012, and again, there wasn't a whole lot there. But the team updated constantly, always making new builds available. It was always clear that something was going on, from the first alpha to the game's eventual final release in October 2015. That's what should be expected. Needless to say, Godus as a whole falls massively short of these standards. So is Godus Wars dead too? Well, there's a bit of news that brings this whole video right up to date. It's about Conrad and it came out a couple of days ago. Has he had some new ideas for the game? Is he about to take people through another new build? I mean, Godus may be virtually damned already, but is he still fighting the good fight? No, he's been let go. Conrad no longer works for 22 Cans. His contract ran out and was not renewed. According to most people, Konrad Nazinski was indeed the last person who was working on Godus in any way, shape or form. Simon Phillips, the company CEO, has gone on record to say that of course Godus is not dead. Obviously it's just resting, pining for the fields. No, there's no release date or even a rough idea of one. Let's face it, it's pretty clear that everyone at 22 Cans is now working on this game called The Trail. But what even is The Trail? It's a Molyneux game, apparently. He's used all sorts of words like communication and discovery to describe it, but not much else. And it's a mobile game. Also, when Molyneux announced the game in 2014, it came as a bit of a surprise to folks at 22 Cans who didn't know a whole lot about it either. Nothing ever changes, does it? Seriously, to be honest, it barely matters what the trail is. Godus will forever leave a bad taste in the mouth at the merest mention of Peter Molyneux's name. It has sullied his reputation forever. It is, to say the least, an absolute shit show. Again, just to show how steep the decline is. In almost 4 years, this is where Godus is at. In the late 90s, it took a then 30-strong Lionhead studio 4 years to make black and frickin' white. How the mighty have fallen. This is it now. He may not be a CEO, but Peter Molyneux can never go home again. Even if he appears in the press, and of course he has a number of times since that farewell tour, someone will be there to say that they thought that Molly wasn't ever going to speak to the press again. And quite right too. But Molyneux needs to be in the press. Who else can sell his games except him? No one else has ever tried. Selling games is kind of what he frickin' does. Without Molyneux in public, the games will fail. And so, well, The Trail? It's already dead. It would have to be quite literally the greatest game ever made for it to repair the damage done to 22 Cans and to the reputation of Peter Molyneux. This whole sorry episode is one of the most tragic ends to a glittering career, or at least it should be, that I have covered, and it's painful, but not one bit of it was undeserved. Summing up Godus isn't easy. It feels like a shame to cap off this look at Peter Molyneux with the absolute worst thing he's ever produced, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. I mean, it's a completely average mobile game at best, so even without everything else it would still be a bad ending. But of course Molly had to go ahead and promise that the game would redefine the God genre. He can't ever just deliver. The damage it did to his reputation has already been discussed, but there's the damage it did to other things like, say, Kickstarter. This whole thing could be a cautionary tale, something to stop people from donating to any Kickstarter at all. It's a sad fact. For all the good projects that come out of Kickstarter, one Godus can wipe away the achievements of 20 Shovel Knights, Undertales and, hell, even Elite Dangerouses. David Braben, who came onto Kickstarter at the same time as Molly and was also greeted with a fair bit of suspicion, he managed to do a pretty good job with his game. But people are always going to remember the failures that came from Kickstarter rather than the successes, and few have failed harder than Godus did. Worst of all though is the damage to the studio itself. 22 Cans was a good team, a healthy mix of youngsters and vets, including several who have been loyal to Molyneux since the beginning, and they've all been screwed by this whole thing. That to me is one of the most important parts of Molyneux's legacy, the talent that has come from under his wing, and here that's just a washout. It's a black mark on a CV. Oh, and speaking of Peter Molyneux's legacy, well, perhaps it's time to finally wrap this whole thing up. What exactly is the legacy of Peter Molyneux? It's tough to say or even to break it down into what's good and bad, especially after all that bad. But we have to look at everything as a whole. There is that passion and bullshit question, because there are a lot of contradictions when it comes to even the most commonly received opinions. For example, if Molyneux was a serial bullshitter purely interested in money, why did he ever leave both EA and Microsoft? Molly was able to climb close to the top of the greasy pole not once, but twice, and both times he ditched it all right at the point where he could have just buggered off and counted his cash for the rest of time. And then there's the interviews. I mean, Peter Molyneux in interviews is pure chaos in motion. When it comes to selling a game, an experience, there is arguably no one better in the history of the industry. He is a master salesman. He was a trendsetter here. During a time when most games people could barely look a camera in the eye, Molyneux stood out as a man in his element. If making games is where Molly feels most alive, being in front of the camera is a close second. Being a salesman though comes with faults, especially when you end up breaking all the rules. Arguably there are few people who are actually worse at PR than he is. He promises too much, he talks excitedly about concepts years before they're ready, he screws up, admits he's made mistakes, and then makes those same mistakes again. He'll admit behind the scenes that hey, you gotta sell these things, or that he's made stuff up on the spot, but it won't stop him. He gets carried away because he genuinely does love what he makes and thinks that it's capable of so much. I mean, remember that a Molyneux game does tend to evolve after all. Something like the Acorn, for example, that came very early in the original Fable's development, when it was still Project Ego. There's no record of an acorn turning into a tree that I can find in any of the full-on junkets Molly did for Fable in 2002 or 2003. It was an early fancy, and the idea was probably dropped early on. But it is just one example of many. It is easy to get carried away with him because of how much he gets carried away. The Acorn is special though, as it is one of the few times that Molyneux gets caught on a sticky wicket. Sometimes he is careful. Those bigger lies, such as having multiplayer in the original, or children, easy to dial back. They're big, they couldn't be done in time, they'll be in the sequel, and so they were. An evolving acorn's never big enough to be a major focus, it requires a lot of resources and so forth, and so it just gets dropped again and again. The development of a Peter Molyneux game is not conducive to such little details being planned out in advance, as opposed to them just happening as panicked flourishes. But then Molyneux always goes on and on about those little details anyway, instead of actually talking about a freaking game. Which is why, well, he should really just stop hitting himself. Of course, there are bigger lies out there. Which brings me to the question of what exactly went wrong. How did Peter Molyneux fall so hard? So many of his games deal with the concept of evolution, but it seems to me that one person never truly evolved. And that was him. Certainly in a business sense. In the 90s, everything he touched turned to gold. Bullfrog were one of the best companies around. And with that, Molyneux's business practices and games development practices were set in stone, never to change. With Lionhead, things didn't change all that much, even though the manpower and resources required for a successful game studio increased dramatically, and he just about got away with it. But those original plans to retain a small team and create a single game at a time were unworkable, and they fell apart spectacularly. The company almost paid the ultimate price back then until Microsoft stepped in. And then, with 22 cans, Molyneux was still trying to do the same thing, only with regular people supplying the resources. It was completely unworkable. To create games in that usual disorganised way, it was doomed from the start. Something was bound to go wrong. And so it did. And it was the worst possible thing to go wrong. The plans for the Kickstarter backers and Brian Henderson. Peter Molyneux seems to think that just because a business plan, a credo worked so well before that it's bound to work again. But the world of gaming has changed so much at all levels. Perhaps, I don't know, he saw something in the independent world that would allow him to channel that bullfrog spirit, but even there the world has changed and suddenly Peter Molyneux is completely out of touch with it. There's a level of openness and planning required that Molyneux would never be able to truly give, and thanks to things like Kickstarter that allow indie developers the chance to find resources they'd have never had before, the standards are always rising and the rewards are highly lucrative. It's a cutthroat world where everyone is always demanding attention, where big games come out of nowhere at a lightning pace. It was a world that Peter Molyneux, with his evolving games, golden promises and lengthy development cycles, was completely unfit to enter. Maybe he thought that with his clout and experience the indie gaming world would surely be an easy win. If so, he was wrong. He came in there like a bull in a frickin' china shop, and all he did was smash a load of vases and kick a few chickens. It goes without saying that all of these things have greatly damaged Molyneux's legacy, as they should. There is a lot of good that he's done. It could be argued that Molyneux is at the centre of a couple of generations worth of excellent British game developers. His effect on the British games industry is massive, and on the whole very positive. We wouldn't be anywhere near where we are in the world of gaming without Bullfrog, Lionhead and Molyneux. Even now, there are many successful companies that are set up with Molyneux alumni, or that have taken their own lessons from Molyneux, good or bad. And he has made some very good games indeed, although admittedly not for a while. He is always going to be frustrated though, because he will never get to be where he wants to be. He can't just go back to designing games at the head of a company. If Peter Molyneux is to have any further impact on the world of gaming that's positive, he will have to pick one of those two paths. At the moment he's designing. But can he actually stay there? I don't know. Honestly, I doubt it. In the end though, after everything, do I like Peter Molyneux? There is something about him that still makes me like him, or really want to like him, even after all the shit there's been. Perhaps it's that earnestness, the ability that he has to make something seem like a truly otherworldly experience. Or maybe he still has goodwill from the positive stuff he's done, giving young folk their start in the industry, or just making those great games. Maybe there's a blind faith there that somehow, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, he actually can get back to what he once was. There is a force for good in Peter Molyneux, and it wants to get out. I honestly believe that. Although for it to do so would require drastic changes that frankly I don't think he would be prepared to do. And at the core of all of this, in spite of all that utter bullshit and incompetence, there is a rather personable man who would probably be very nice to have a drink with. He'd certainly have a lot of stories to tell, that's for sure. You would just have to prepare yourself for the moment when, after a cracking meal and way too much wine, he pulls out the briefcase and tries to sell you a plot of land.
This is my life, my passion. I don't think I'll ever stop. I don't think I would know what to do with my life without making games. It's a fantastic, amazing, incredible job. I get to have a dream and see that as reality. What else could you do?
Thanks so much for watching the last part of the Peter Molyneux saga, and indeed for watching the whole series if you have. It certainly has been a rollercoaster of a journey. If you like this video then please consider subscribing, and also consider following me on my social media and supporting me on Patreon. Okay, let's get down to the usual Sinson antics. Martin Pataki, Taylor Hammond, Mark Johnston, Twisted Squad, Joel Hartman, Phil Taprock, Ben Coker, Jamie Hampshire, Andre Russell, Leah Norris, and Grayson Blackpaw. Yeah, that sounded alright. And of course we have more thank yous to deliver. We have Tim Lintz, Robert Kelly, Alexander Baldeck, Dan Wasco, Terry Anderson, Francisco Pimenta, Kev Gilmore, Alexander Green, Thomas Daniels, Greg Olson, Christian Earnshaw, Stuart Ashen, Lee Harris, Tiago Pereira dos Santos Silva, James Idd, Mike Siegler, Ed Reader, Russell Hugo, Ken Barraclough, Mark Johnson, Gerard Morris, Matt Lee, Paolo Leary, Graham Kamak, Scott Mittin, Nicole Ketchum, Mark Brooks, Ninth Demon, Peter Sidorn, Ludwig Holmstrom, John Ezell, Kit Leary, Elle O'Brien, Dave Parkinson, Novel, and Olaf Allbean. Thank you all so much for amazing support. What a series it has been. Truly one of the hardest things that I think I've ever done on this channel, but we made it. We made it through Peter Molyneux, and now, well, we can all move on to something else. That something else should be coming pretty soon, where we will be going to the land of Japan for a video either on a really weird Kusogi sort of game, or a certain sound team. I'm not quite sure yet, I'll probably end up doing both though. But until then, it is time to say goodbye. Thank you all so much for watching, and wherever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.